they established that there could be these other dioceses here in the United States for the good of the people and the establishment of the church. Here on the right side, my right side, your left side, is St. Nikolaj Kostur. She was the first administrator of this new diocese that was created in America of the Serbian Orthodox Church. He was actually also buried in Libertyville, St. Sava Monastery, just outside of where St. Mardari was buried. And he was also glorified as saint in 2003, although we knew much before that he was a saint. And much of his relics are still in the ground there at St. Sava Monastery, and a good portion of it has already been taken back to Serbia. That's just a side note. So you can see this Archimandrite Mardari here in this picture. After coming here and finding the situation, he went back to Serbia in 1921 to 1923, and he was in a monastery there called Rakovica, the Holy Archangel Gabriel, and established a monastic school there. Then he was sent back to America in 1923, and then in 1925, there was a foundation of the church in the monastery of St. Sava, which he built himself, and he was consecrated a bishop in 1926 in Serbia, and then came back to the United States. Bishop Mardari was very ill. He had problems with his lungs. He had all sorts of issues at a young age. And he constantly battled with his health. He would travel around getting care, whether it be in Arizona because of the dry air, and sometimes locally here in Michigan, at the University of Michigan. But nevertheless, he persevered and wanted to build this monastery of St. Sava for all of the Orthodox people, especially the Serbs, to have a place where they could come. And originally it was supposed to be an orphanage, but also a gathering place for the Serbian people. So he worked really hard, but remember, the 30s, 1931, as you see your consecration, it was the time of the Great Depression. There wasn't any money. He would ride his bike on Milwaukee Avenue from Libertyville to Chicago and drive bricks back on the bike. Okay, so there's actually like a sketch of him on the bike going to Libertyville. He did this quite a bit. They would mock him. Even the priests would mock him, the bishop, and say, "Oh, what is he doing? The bishop, he's building a monastery or building a church and dying from hunger. You know, why are you doing this? Why are you building it in the middle of the cornfields, this monastery?" And he said, "I'm doing it so I can unite the Serbian community that was in Milwaukee and in Chicago, and they can have a place where they could gather." So he was able to consecrate the church September 6, 1931, but it wasn't completed. As you can see, that's what it looks like. Now, if you go to the monastery there on Milwaukee Avenue, you'll see that's how it looks. The bell tower was added in the early 80s, and it was consecrated in September of 1982, which was my first visit to the monastery. Just a little short story about something that happened in his life. In 1933, he was very ill in the hospital in Libertyville, and the doctor said he was going to die. And two priests came to visit him that night, very late, thinking that was it. And he asked them, "Please go to the church at midnight and serve divine liturgy and bring me Holy Communion." Thinking that he was going to die, the doctor said that was it. And the priest went, so one sang, one served. They took communion to him. He had communion, and the next morning, the doctors couldn't believe what was going on. He was doing well, he was eating, all of his vitals had changed, he was perking up. And he ended up living until 1935. But while he was there dying in bed, he prayed to God to give him a little bit more time to finish the inside of the monastery.
Wow.
And that's what happened. And then in his Paschal epistle that year, he wrote about it to all the people, telling them about the power of the Eucharist, how important it was for the people to receive Holy Communion and live a Eucharistic life. And he had a vision at that time of a chalice above the monastery, and people gathered all around the chalice. And he mentions this in this epistle. And no one really thought about it much after that. So in 1935, that's the inside of the monastery. In 1935, St. Mardaria passed away on December 12th in Ann Arbor, Michigan, receiving treatment at the University of Michigan at the hospital. And he was brought back to Libertyville by train, stopped in different churches where they had memorial services. And at his funeral, there was, at the time, Bishop Athenagoras and Bishop Leonti. Bishop Athenagoras from the Greek church and Bishop Leonti from the Russian church, along with 17 priests from his diocese. He left in his testament that there was some troubled priests at the time. And all of the priests that caused him problems, he, at his funeral, asked the bishop that served to give them all awards. So those to become archpriests or archpriests with a cross in our church, however we have it, because he thanked them for helping him in his journey. He was buried in church. Again, there were 2 bishops and 17 priests. I mention that because usually when you have a lot of clergy, you think that everything's going to go as planned and happen how it should be. Well, we thought that was the case. Now, I grew up going to the monastery. Oh, let's see which pictures I have here. I grew up going to the monastery. We had camp there, children's camp in the summer. We'd go there every day. We'd have service morning and night. We would come into church and we would see that there was at the right side of the church this Bishop Mardaria buried, and on the left side was the king of Serbia, the last king of Serbia, Peter II, who was the only European monarch buried in the United States. And we would come and visit the monastery regularly. Like my father was a priest in Indiana, so we would come up for funerals or visit the bishop or for any kind of diocesan events. And I remember going into the church, and we would always light a candle by Bishop Mardaria's grave. And there was a sign, as you walk in, it was his last will and testament, and he says what this place is, and it's I bequeath this to my Serbian people, Orthodox faithful, to come here, gather here, pray here, etc. So he always wanted people to light a candle when they came to his grave. So we would always do that. And I would always think, why would I light a candle here? You know, what's the connection with our family or something like that as a kid? And then I was in my father's office one day in our home, and I see a picture of the patriarch, picture of the bishop. I saw a picture of some Serbian war heroes. I know who all they were, and I see a picture of a bishop. But I remember it was on a purple sheet of paper. It was like a photocopy. And I remember asking my dad, I must have been 6 or 7. I said, who's this one? He said, oh, that's Bishop Mardaria. He'll be a saint. You'll see one day. My father said that about several saints. He's 4 for 5 right now. So, batting 800. So, I didn't think too much of it. And he said, oh, that's the one we go to when we go to the monastery, and he's buried there in the church. So, I didn't think too much of it. I'd go to camp. We'd go there. We'd see his on the ground. Didn't think too much. Later on, I go to seminary, I get ordained. I was the Bishop Longing's deacon for about 5 years. And in 2011 or 12, there was a meeting of bishops, Serbian bishops in America, of North America and South America. So there's about 5 bishops. They got together, and they started discussing Bishop Mardaria. It happened to be his day of repose, December 12th. And so there was a bishop, Metropolitan Amfilochios, who was in Montenegro. But he was the administrator of the Diocese of South America. And he said, oh, let's have a memorial service for him. So they served a memorial service. And he said, all the old bishops would talk about Mardaria, how he was a great man, pious. He lived a life of struggle, and he suffered so much here in America, making church life be fruitful and ordaining priests and consecrating churches. They all were convinced he was a saint. I really believe he's a saint. And they were all saying, yes, we heard the same thing. We know holy life, And so they their meeting, and they said, we really think we should approach the patriarch and other bishops about the glorification of him because of all that he left here. Had it not been him, we wouldn't have anything here in America. So they write a letter to the Holy Assembly of Bishops in Serbia, and the patriarch said, hold on, let's go slowly, let's not get too fast with this. So he said, let's pray about it. So they had their assembly, and they said, let's pray and see what happens. And at the next assembly, a year later, they all felt that he should be glorified as saint, based on his life and everything he did. So he was glorified. We had the first feast in the ground. Not too many people understood about him. You know, Serbs, we build big churches and we die for them, but we don't always go to them as much as we should. That's what they say about us. So our bishop said, you know, we really need to take his relics out of the ground so people can venerate him. And, excuse me, he said, we need to do it. I'm going to talk to the patriarch. So at that time it was Patriarch Irenei, blessed memory. And he said, Your Holiness, we really should open the relics. And he said, oh no, leave him alone. Let him rest there in the grave. No, don't, just let him go. Let him be there. You can venerate him without opening. He said, I know, Your Holiness, but there's so many relics here. We don't have relics like that in America. And people, if they will see with their eyes that there is a saint here, that's something more special than just a grave, they'll come and venerate and realize that his sanctity, because we can see how holy he is. And he said, I'm against it, but you're the bishop there. If you choose to do it, I will support you. So, of course, he came back. He said, we're going to open the relics. So he told me, you're going to be in charge of organizing all this. I said, oh, great. So, again, I never opened up relics of saints before. So we're calling Monathos. How do they open the relics of the monks and clean the relics and everything? And they gave us instructions. Okay, you know, when you take the bones out, you wash them with warm water and white wine. You put spikenard oil on them. So we got everything we needed for this. You wrap them in fine linen. Okay, sounds good. We'll handle this. So we arranged a date for this. It was supposed to be done on May 4th, 2017. We served Divine Liturgy that morning. The bishop, myself, the hieromonk there, and a hierodeacon. And there were very few people that knew what was happening, when we were going to do it, because we didn't want it to be such a big event. We wanted it to be more quiet. And we arranged a company to come and open the ground, because there was a granite slab and then cement underneath. So they came, they worked 6 hours to open it up. And then we said, okay, finally, we're going to get to the coffin so we can do all we need to do. Well, they got in and there was a vault. How are we going to get the vault open? We need a vault company. So we had to wait another day. So May 5th comes, and the vault company comes. There was a doctor there who had to be there when we opened up the grave. There was our local Serbian funeral director that organized some of these things. And the vault people come, and they're like in hazmat suits, masks, glasses, everything, it works. And we're all like this, you know, we're wearing a healing. I'm like, don't worry, you'll be fine. You know, they say, oh, this is a biohazard or something like that. And so we start opening, and we get the vault open, comes off, but how are you going to carry it out? It's 1,000 pounds. So they put a pulley on top. And they're trying to pull the vault cover, and at once the chain broke. And it just went down like a foot, and then all of a sudden, boom, the cover of the vault fell on top of the casket. We fell, oh Lord have mercy. And it fell at an angle, okay? So the way it fell, it looked as if it fell where his head was. So it would have damaged his skull. Keep in mind, we already ordered a reliquary for the church. And if we ordered it the same size as something that we found in Serbia, 64 inches. 64 inches is 5 feet 4 inches. St. Mardaria was a Montenegrin. Montenegrins are very tall. Typically, we expected there to be bones. So this happens, and the vault cover falls in that spot. It hits the top of the casket. The casket breaks from top to bottom. And at that moment, this beautiful fragrance comes out. And I said to the bishop, I said, "Do you smell it?" He said, "Oh, maybe it's a censer." I said, "No, it's a different smell, completely different smell." The hierarch said, "Yeah, it's completely different from this incense." And it's this beautiful fragrance. Imagine, he was in the grave for 82 years. Wow. So, the vault people, one of the men, who was Catholic, he starts crying. And he said, "This is too holy for me. I can't do this." I said, "No, it's okay. You have a blessing. This is good for you and your family. Just do it. Just do it." So they continued. We were able to get the cover of the vault out. First, we took pieces of the casket off the top, and we could see that he was buried the wrong way, facing the west instead of the east. Oh, wow. 2 bishops and 17 priests to be buried in the wrong way. How do you make such a mistake? But it was God's providence. Because had he not been buried that way, his head would have been hit by the vault. So remember, God always has a plan, even when it doesn't seem like it's the way it's supposed to be. Wow. So then we saw, okay, we have to get to him, but he was covered. His face was covered with the air. The priest.
Yeah, the air. You're right. You saw what I put on my head tonight? That's called the air. And so when a priest or a bishop passes away or a deacon, they put it on their head as a covering. Yeah.
So we didn't see his face, that it was intact. But we saw his shoes. So we were able to get the cover out. It took 8 of us, I think, to pull it out. It was very heavy, 1,000 pounds. We pull it out, and then we see him there. We can see his shoes. His shoes have decayed. And you could tell, it was a wet environment on the ground, even in the vault. But no smell, other than the beautiful smell that came out. There was no bad smell. And one of us went down there and looked at his foot, and his socks were there. And in his socks, you saw bones. You could feel the bones. So they opened it up, and we saw golden bones. They looked like gold. Beautiful. That's a good sign. Especially in Manatos, they say if it's gold, that's a sign of sanctity. So we were all relieved. Oh, thank God. The bishop was so relieved. Okay, he says to me, "I'm going to go now. We have a conference call with the rest of the priests. I'm going to tell him what's happening. I'm going to tell all of them what's happening to be ready for the big glorification in July of that year." I said, "Okay." He said, "You keep working with the hieromonk and the hierodeacon." I said, "No problem." So he went, he made his conference call, and we were able to pull him out of the ground, leaving the casket inside. We couldn't get the casket out because of the way things fell. It was too difficult, and it was decaying. The casket was decaying. Yeah. So we put a sheet underneath him, lifted him up, and put him in a temporary casket of metal.
You weren't afraid it was going to dissolve?
Well, I was, but the reason why I was comforted was that the doctor that was there, he said, "There's a mattress under him.
Wow.
And I'm going to put this underneath, and then you just lift the whole thing up and put him inside."
Wow.
Okay. Remember that. I'll tell you about that, because it continues. The story goes on. So we pull him out. There's 4 or 5 of us there. And I'm looking at his hands, and I'm thinking to myself, how is he bones if he's holding a cross in his hands? It doesn't make sense. If he's bones, it'll just fall over. So this is very strange. So I walked up to where his hands are. I pulled up his sleeve, and I found his hands intact.
Wow.
Okay? So his hands were very light then. It wasn't as dark as now. If you go to the monastery, you'll see they look very brown. But that's because we washed this wine in water, warm water, and then put the oil on, as we were instructed to do so. So I see his hands, and out of instinct, I just grabbed his hands. Like I grabbed someone else's hand. I just couldn't, I couldn't let go. I held him for like 30 seconds. And there was a seminarian there as well, and I said, "Go call the bishop and tell him the relics are incorrupt." So he calls the bishop, and he goes, "He wants to talk to you." And he goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, "He's incorrupt. The relics are incorrupt." He said, "I was just there. I saw his bones from his feet." I go, "No, his hands are incorrupt. Come over here. I can't do this myself." So he came. He said, "What's going on, right?" So we didn't inspect anything at that time, but because he was in that metal coffin, or casket, we decided that we would take him across the Milwaukee Avenue to where the bishop's residence is, because they had to clean up the rest of the church because there was all this dust and everything. And in the Serbian church, we follow the Julian calendar. St. George's Day is on May 6th. So there would be a lot of people coming to the monastery. So everything had to get done by May 6th. So they basically made him leave and made us leave. And they're fixing the ground so people can come to church the next day and cleaning everything up. So we walk him across the street, past his house where he lived in, and go into the bishop's house. And then we started looking to see what's going on. He had his vestments on. His vestments had turned green just because they were gold, and then I guess with time they changed color. Everything was decaying around him. The casket was decaying. The cushions inside the casket were decayed. His mitra on his head was, the icons had decayed on it. His cross and panagia also. And we started removing his vestments, and we had to cut it out, things like that. And then we removed the hair on his face, and we saw his beard completely there.
Wow.
Right? Black. He had no gray hair. He was 46 when he died.
Wow.
His hair, when we took off his mitra, his hair flowed out. It looked like it was conditioned the day before.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you can see his hair there, right? So there's dust in there, but then we combed his hair, cleaned him, washed him.
Wow.
That's a better picture of his hands after we took off his vestments.
Wow.
You can see all the hairs. Okay, so this shouldn't be the case, right? You should decay. But that wasn't what God had in store. So remember that mattress I said. When we pulled him up out of the ground, he just came like really easily, one piece. And so when we're in the bishop's house doing this cleaning, I said to one of the priests that came, he heard on the conference call they were doing this, so he came up. And I said, "Where's the mattress?" He said, "What mattress?" I go, "Well, they told me there was a mattress under him, and that's why we could pick him up." So there's no mattress. There was no mattress. He was just one piece, and that's why we could pick him up.
Wow.
And take him out.
Wow.
So, we inspected him, and from his knees down, he was bones. From his knees up to his top of his head, intact. And that is often the case with the saints, that it will start to decay, but then stop out of God's grace. God's grace will stop that, because the natural process is this mold forms on the body, and it eats everything when someone dies. That's just what happens. Sorry, you guys just finished dinner. But God's grace stops this in order to show us, the grace that He gives us and the resurrection that awaits us. And now, as we approach Lazarus Saturday, who already started to decay in the grave, right? 4 days in the grave, and then Christ stops it, right? With the saints, it starts but stops. So I've heard the explanation that, it's to show that the body's not petrified. If it was all one piece, it would just mean that it was petrified. But no, it starts and stops. So we were all overjoyed, but we didn't know what to do. We didn't know how do you clean the relics of a saint. I said to the bishop, "What do we do?" He said, "Well, I've never done this." And he says to me, "Call someone." I go, "Well, you're the bishop. You call someone." I said, "Call someone in Serbia. They probably know." He goes, "They're sleeping now." I go, "Well, let's wait till tomorrow." He said, "We don't have time for tomorrow. You have to do this now." He says, "Call some Russians." I said, "Okay, who am I going to call?" I'm thinking, I'll call the priest from San Francisco, which St. John's relics are. So I called the priest there at the cathedral. I know some of them because I went to Russian seminary. And then no one's answering their phone. No one's answering. So finally I called this one priest I know. My father has known him for years and years. And he said, "Yes, I was there." And he gave us instructions what to do, how to wash and prepare the body. And so that's what we did. So obviously we were shocked, right? You know that you're going to find a treasure with finding the relics of a saint. But this type of treasure, who would have thought? So it's also God's providence that his knee down was bones so that he would fit into his reliquary. We already ordered it. And that morning, before we opened, we were in front of the altar on the Angon. And I said, the bishop was standing in the middle, and we served a prayer service, to the saint before we actually were able to open up the vault. And I had happened to read something from St. John of Kronstadt that morning about relics. And I just said to the bishop, I said, imagine if we opened him and he was incorrupt. And he said, in Serbian there's a saying, "Daj bre bolane, get out of here, you sick one. We're not worthy of that." And I said, you're right. And for some reason I said to him, I know, but he is. And the bishop got all pale. He said, oh my gosh, he is. And he said, what are we going to do? And he goes, oh, let's not worry about it. And so that's what happened, And so all these things start clicking as the day goes on. And then we were worried he wasn't going to fit into the reliquary, which hadn't arrived yet, but was already ordered. And we immediately messaged the man that was doing the carving. How big is he? He said 64 inches. We measured him with the mitra on. He fits perfectly.
Wow.
So it's like, it fits perfectly, but he looks short because doesn't have his knee down. But he also gave us his relics already to give to people, to give to different churches. And so, as time went on, this is that day. After we cleaned him, washed him, we wrapped him in fine linen. And then you can see his beard there on the right side, or your left side rather, and then his hands after we put the oil on.
Wow.
And then we put him, we left him, actually he stayed in the bishop's house for about a month because we couldn't take him back to church. We had no place to put him. So he stayed there, and then the reliquary arrived, and then we kept him in the altar at St. Selma Monastery, the monastery he built himself. And then on the feast of the birth of St. John the Baptist, which on our calendar is July 7th, which was his name in the world, we vested him in his vestments. And then he was prepared, and then on July 17th, we had the glorification, like a great glorification. The Patriarch of Serbia came. All the representatives of the Orthodox churches was there. It was really like a true jubilee of orthodoxy. Everyone was there, the priests. We all served together and glorified this great common saint to each and every one of us. So I want you to know that he is your saint, just like he is our saint. Would love to have you visit the monastery, visit his relics. The relics are open on Sundays, so you can see his relics. When we covered his face, I left it so you could still see his beard. I didn't cover it completely because I wanted people to see that. And then his hands, of course, you can see. Many miracles have happened. One lady at his glorification on that July 17th, and the reason why it was July 17th, just as a side note, was it was exactly 100 years, or July 16th, it was exactly 100 years from when he was sent from Russia to America. And it just happened to be that was a Sunday, and that was the right time. And so it all worked out. It was like after 100 years, and after 82 years in the grave, he came out of the ground to, show the monastery and show himself, and for people to get closer to Christ and to Christ's resurrection. Truly a blessing. He lived a life, as Christ teaches us to be the great shepherd, the good shepherd. He was a good shepherd to his flock, and that shows through the miraculous relics that we have. Some miracles that happened at his glorification, that eve, at the vigil, when he opened up his relics the first time for people to see. There was a woman there, and this priest said to her, "Why don't you get closer?" And she said, "I don't need to." He said, "Well, you should see the relics." She said, "I already saw the relics," because the relics were in church, and the hieromonk there opened it up for her because she had cancer all over her body. Yeah. And the glass even wasn't on at that time. And she says to the priest, "I saw him before the glorification, and I touched him, and my cancer is completely gone." And so she was so overjoyed, and that was like one of the first miracles we heard from his relics. And then there was a woman that came to Chanica Monastery, which is just 6 miles away. She came and she was praying. There's an icon of the Most Holy Theotokos of the three hands, which is a copy from Hilanda Monastery in Monathos. And it's also a miracle-working icon. And she came and she was praying in front of the icon, because she lost all of her hearing in one ear and 60% in the other. So she was very saddened by this. And she was praying, and the bishop walked in and he said, well, that's great you're praying. You should go by the saint in Libertyville and pray by him. So she went over to Libertyville, came to the relics, and she was bowing down above the relics. And she lifted her head, her hearing came back. Another girl in my parish, 16 years old, was diagnosed with lymphoma. And so I said, maybe we should go serve unction at the relics. And this has been a practice that we started. When someone is very sick, we'll serve unction there. And then in the final prayer for the sick person, when the other priests hold the gospel over the head of the sick person, we do it over the relics. So the sick person is leaning over the relics and the gospel on their head. And I kid you not, I was serving with another priest. It was like electricity coming up from the relics to the gospel. She was supposed to have 6 months of treatment. This was 2 months in. She went in for a scan, and the doctor said, your cancer is gone. It's completely gone. And the doctor said, well, just as a precautionary, we'll finish the treatment. But she's like, I'm fine. So, we have our saints at home, in Greece, in Serbia, Russia, Montenegro, where we may be. But in our new home, where we live now, God has given us a saint. God has not left us alone in this world where there's so much sin and evil and all these things around us that we see. He'll never will leave us, and He gives us this great saint. So please, you're more than welcome. Please do come visit the monastery. We're happy to have you. God bless you, and thank you for your attention. I hope I didn't talk too long.
No, thank you, Father. As we wrap up, does anyone have any last-minute questions for Father? Anything regarding? We got a couple.
Just one comment, Father. It's amazing to hear. For me, you're finishing the story because our summer camp in Maui, we took our campers to visit. It must have been like about 7 or 8 years ago. And,
They still go annually.
Yeah, every year usually.
And I distinctly remember because I heard that we were going, and I was really excited because I've never been to Greece to see a saint. One that was uncorrupted, and I heard about this all the time, and I thought, I'd really love to see something like this. And so when I heard that it was on the schedule, I didn't know what to expect. And so I went in, and I was just totally blown away. I see his body. Again, I thought it was a casket, but I guess it's a
reliquary.
Yeah. And the skin is all dark and black, and you can see it. And so actually, I saw it on the face with the beard. So you're telling me you put that on his face?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness!
I vested him. I put all of his vestments on him. And when we vested him, we read all the prayers, just as if you're the bishop reads, or the vesting, everything as if he was alive. And then one other thing is, when we put him in the reliquary, we left him facing the west, because he constantly went against the west. The west was always leading people away from Christ, right? The easy way instead of the way of sacrifice and struggle. So we left him preaching to the west instead of facing towards the east.
Interesting.
So the rest of the bones for the legs are there in where?
The bishop has them, he keeps them, and then they're distributed to different parishes and dioceses throughout the whole world.
Oh, okay, so you only have them
No, they're not there because that's what, like I said, he gave us him so we didn't have to worry about, like a lot of saints, and when you see like a little relic of a saint, a bone or something, that's we have to cut that and then distribute it. And so he made it a lot easier for us. But it's amazing, his skin, I mean, you see all of the hair, everything. When we took off the cover, we saw his teeth, his every eyelash, every eyebrow. It's how can this be? And it's just God's grace. And as we approach the resurrection now, just a reminder to us, I wait the resurrection, This is what we live for the resurrection. And it's just a reminder constantly.
If you don't take Father's recommendation, everybody needs to go out there. it'll change your faith. Please go out there.
Okay, what are we going?
We're gonna go soon.
Let me know, I'll set it up.
No, I know. That's fine.
Father, I was there July 18th and 2020, when Serbian people, over 500 probably, walked from the monastery from Birmingham to Libertyville.
Yes.
I was part of it with my friend, Serbian Susan,
Yes.
and it was like 3-4 hours. Older people, younger people, kids. July 18th was hot. Everybody was singing, called the airplanes, and then we went to the monastery and we saw everything inside.
Right, every year that we have this, what we call Lithia, or this cross-bearing procession.
That's a big feat.
Lithia, right?
Yeah.
From the monastery in Nugračanica, which is 6 miles away, till St. Saba. So they start about 6:30 in the morning, and then they walk to the monastery, and then we serve liturgy. The last couple of years, we've been serving liturgy under a pavilion on the other side of the river. So can be more accommodated, so everyone can be there. The first couple of years, we served outside in front of the church. It's hard because it's not covered. The sun is strong in July and things like that. So, but yeah, every year we have that procession. One thing I mentioned before, I said that his vision about the chalice in the sky and everyone gathered around at the glorification. I was at St. John of Shanghai in San Francisco's glorification as a child. My father knew him personally.
Wow.
So we all went as a family in 1994, and it left a great impression on me. At his glorification in San Francisco, they closed off the streets, and they walked around the block, the entire city block, with the relics of St. John. And I remember this, and as we were planning the glorification, I said to the bishop, it would be nice if we carried him around. He said, it's going to be cumbersome, it's hard, who's going to carry him? I said, I'll figure it out, we'll get the priest to carry him. And so he kind of let me do whatever I want, which is nice. I said, this will be good. He goes, okay. He wanted to make everything less complicated because the patriarch was coming. He was old and things like that. And so we set everything up that we were going to carry him. And I said, this will be good for the people to see, And I said at the glorification, at the end of the liturgy, mind you, one of the metropolitans spoke that day, and it ended up going for like 45 minutes. After the patriarch spoke, it just kept going. Everyone was tired. The sun was beating. He said, we're going to carry him around now. And the patriarch said, oh, it's so hot, And that day, and I know there's different traditions within Orthodoxy about receiving the mysteries, how often, and different types of. In the Slavic tradition, usually they want the people to have confession every time before they have communion, right? That's just kind of an old way. But that has, over the last 20, 30 years, has changed kind of more Eucharistic participation. And that day, almost everyone, if not everyone, received Holy Communion that day. Okay? It was a beautiful event. I don't know, we had like 10 chalices. It was just magnificent. It was such a joy, light feeling. And then, as we were going to carry the relics, the patriarch said no, and the bishop said, no, we already have everything planned. Don't worry, the priests are going to do it. And so, we pick him up, and we start walking. And we're singing the hymns, and this is just a side note. Nikola Mirotic, the basketball player,
yeah.
We were looking, one of the priests, I said, find someone to carry the candle. And he didn't know who Nikola Mirotic was. And he said, that's the tallest guy, I'm going to get him to carry it. So he said, hey young man, here, take this candle and lead the group. And he said, oh, okay, no problem. So he starts carrying it. People are coming up, taking pictures. And the priest said, why are people taking pictures of you carrying the candle? Who are you? You should be taking a picture of the saint. And he said, well, I mean, maybe they've seen me somewhere before. He goes, where would they see you? Who are you? He said, well, I'm Nikola Mirotic. He goes, okay, who are you? I play for the Bulls. He goes, oh, okay. Anyway, so we started taking him around the monastery, and they had a drone, and there was a picture, an entire circle of people around the whole monastery, not around the church, around the entire monastery, through the cemetery, down, around, up, around, and it was the fulfillment of St. Marzaria's prophecy. Everyone united around the chalice. he had seen his own glorification, and he wrote about it in 1933,
Wow.
not knowing what it was.
Wow.
So God does these things, right? This is just, it's one thing after another.
Serious way.
Wow.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
You are
I have a question.
Yes.
Where in Indiana did your father serve?
Maryville, St. Elijah Serbian Cathedral in Maryville, Indiana. And that's, so I grew up not far from Bishop Antonio.
Yeah, they were close to my father-in-law, Father Ted, because he's in St. Constantine and Helen Cathedral in Maryville. So
Well,
they're
I
very
was
close.
baptized in St. Constantine in Helen.
Yeah.
It was in Gary.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
before both the
Good old
Maryville
times.
times.
Yeah.
The good old times.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thank you, Father. Thank you, everyone. Come get his blessing and then have a beautiful night. Take care.
He's my cubano.